When two biased cops arrest a well-dressed black man in an affluent neighborhood, they never imagine they'll face him the next morning, wearing judicial robes and holding their careers in his hands. The evening air was crisp as Judge Marcus Wilson pulled his sedan into his driveway after a long day at the courthouse. Dressed in casual clothes, a simple polo shirt and slacks, he looked nothing like the authoritative figure who had presided over complex cases earlier that day. He was just a man coming home, keys in hand, thoughts focused on the dinner waiting inside. Two police cruisers suddenly turned onto his street, lights flashing but sirens silent. Officers Daniels and Richards spotted Marcus standing near his car and immediately pulled over. They approached with hands resting on their holsters, faces set with suspicion. "Sir, stop right there and put your hands where we can see them," Officer Daniels called out, his voice cutting through the peaceful suburban silence. Marcus froze, keys dangling from his fingers. With deliberate slowness, he raised his hands to shoulder level. "Officers, is there a problem?" he asked calmly, despite the hammering of his heart. "We've had reports of a suspicious individual in this neighborhood," Officer Richards said, moving closer. "Can you explain what you're doing here?" "I live here," Marcus replied evenly. "This is my home. My ID is in my wallet." "Sure it is," Officer Daniels muttered, exchanging a skeptical glance with his partner. "Turn around, hands against the car." Marcus complied, maintaining his composure even as neighbors began peering through windows. "Officers, this is unnecessary. Save it," Richards interrupted, conducting a pat-down. "We've heard all the stories before." 20 minutes later, despite showing his identification and property documents, Marcus found himself in handcuffs in the back of a police cruiser. The officers had called in the plates on his car, but remained unconvinced by his explanation. The homeowner could be out of town, Daniels had theorized to his partner, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. This guy could have stolen the car and the ID. At the station, Marcus was photographed and fingerprinted. He remained silent except to request his phone call, which was eventually granted with obvious reluctance. He called not his family but his colleague, Judge Sandra Reeves. "Sandra, it's Marcus. I need a favor," he said quietly into the receiver. "Don't post bail, don't send a lawyer. Just make sure I'm in the courtroom tomorrow morning." The holding cell was cold and uncomfortable. Marcus sat on the metal bench, watching officers process other detainees, mostly young men of color brought in for minor offenses. He listened to their stories, nodding occasionally, his judicial mind cataloging details even as he experienced firsthand what so many had described from his witness stand. Morning arrived with the clang of cell doors and the shuffle of prisoners being prepared for arraignment. Officers Daniels and Richards arrived for their shift, joking as they checked the roster. "Let's see what Judge Wilson's got for us today," Daniels said, flipping through papers. "Hope he's in a better mood than last week." Richards nodded. "That guy's a hardest on police procedure." The station sergeant approached them, looking uncomfortable. "You two are wanted in courtroom 3. Priority." "What for?" Richards asked. "Just get there," the sergeant replied, avoiding their eyes. In the courtroom, the officers took their usual places, waiting as cases were called. The bailiff eventually entered from the judge's chambers. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus Wilson," he announced. The door opened, and Marcus emerged in his judicial robes, his face composed and professional. He took his seat at the bench, looking directly at the stunned officers. "Good morning," he said evenly, noting with clinical detachment how the blood drained from their faces. "I believe we've met." The courtroom of Judge Marcus Wilson had always been a place of meticulous order and decorum. The polished oak panels, American flag standing proud beside the state emblem, and the elevated bench all carried the weight of centuries of judicial tradition. This morning, however, the familiar space crackled with unusual tension as officers Daniels and Richards stood rooted to their spots, unable to process what their eyes were telling them. The distinguished black man in judicial robes now sitting on the bench, The very position of authority they'd referenced casually hours earlier was unmistakably the same individual they had handcuffed, processed, and left in a holding cell the previous evening. Judge Wilson surveyed the room with practiced calm, his face betraying none of the emotions that had cycled through him during his night in detention. The night had given him ample time to consider his response. Anger had come first, then indignation, followed by a profound sadness. By morning, these feelings had crystallized into something more purposeful. As he met the officer's shocked expressions, he knew this moment transcended personal vindication. It was an opportunity to create meaningful change. The court calls officers Jason Daniels and Michael Richards, Judge Wilson announced, his resonant voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room. The bailiff, who had been briefed privately before court commenced, moved to escort the bewildered officers forward. Other police officers present in the courtroom exchanged confused glances, while the district attorneys shuffled papers nervously, unclear about what was unfolding. As the officers approached the bench, Judge Wilson noted their transformations. Gone was the swagger and certainty from the previous night. Officer Daniels now looked like he might be sick, his face ashen and eyes darting nervously around the room as if seeking escape. Officer Richards maintained better composure, but the rigid set of his shoulders and the way he compulsively straightened his uniform betrayed his discomfort. Officers Daniels and Richards, Judge Wilson began, his voice level and controlled. I believe formal introductions are in order, as our previous meeting was conducted under different circumstances. A few murmurs rippled through the gallery as those present began to sense something unusual was happening. Judge Wilson raised a hand for silence before continuing. For the record, my name is Marcus Wilson, and I have served as a judge in this district for 11 years. Prior to that, I was a prosecutor for 15 years, and before that, I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law. I have lived in the Oak Ridge neighborhood for 23 years. Last night, at approximately 8:45 p.m., you arrested me on my own property under suspicion of burglary or trespassing, despite my identification, my vehicle registration, and the house keys in my hand. By now, the courtroom was utterly still. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chen had stopped taking notes, her pen hovering motionless above her legal pad. Several veteran officers in the back row exchanged uncomfortable glances, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation. Your Honor, we didn't. Officer Daniels began, his voice cracking. You didn't know who I was. Marcus finished for him, allowing a hint of steel to enter his tone. And that is precisely the point, Officer Daniels. When you saw me last night, you didn't see Judge Wilson. You didn't see a homeowner. You didn't even see a citizen deserving of basic respect and due process. You saw a black man in an affluent neighborhood and immediately assumed criminal intent. Judge Wilson leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped before him. You ignored valid identification that matched the address where you found me. You dismissed legitimate explanations. You proceeded with an arrest based on nothing but suspicion fueled by bias. Officer Richards straightened his back, attempting to regain some professional composure. Sir, with all due respect, we were responding to a call about a suspicious person in the neighborhood. I've reviewed the call log this morning. Officer Richards, Marcus interrupted, holding up a printed transcript. A report of a suspicious person, with no specific criminal activity mentioned. The caller didn't report a break-in, a theft in progress, or any other crime. Tell me, what exactly made this person suspicious enough to warrant immediate detention? The silence that followed was answer enough. Everyone in the courtroom knew what had made the person suspicious, his skin color in that particular neighborhood. Judge Wilson turned his attention to a folder on his bench, opening it deliberately. I have here your arrest report. It states that I was evasive, uncooperative, and unable to produce adequate identification. Body camera footage, which I've requested be preserved, will show that these statements are categorically false. I produced my driver's license showing my address, my bar association ID, and even offered to show you mail from inside my home. You dismissed all of it. Throughout the gallery, people shifted uncomfortably. Several reporters who had been covering routine cases were now frantically taking notes. The police captain, who had slipped in through the side door after hearing whispers of what was happening, stood with his arms crossed, his expression grim. Your actions raise serious questions about procedural violations, potential civil rights infractions, and the culture within your department, Judge Wilson continued. However, I'm not going to use my position to punish you personally. That would be an abuse of power not unlike what I experienced last night. The officers visibly relaxed, but their relief was premature. Instead, Judge Wilson said, his voice gaining momentum, I am ordering a full departmental review of arrest procedures, bias training, and complaint patterns over the past 5 years. I will be filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs, not out of vindictiveness, but because the system cannot correct what it does not acknowledge. And you too will be the first officers to participate in a newly established community oversight program that I will personally help design. He looked directly at them, his gaze unwavering. Additionally, I'll be presiding over every case you bring to this court for the next 6 months, with particular attention to procedure and probable cause. Not because I hold a grudge, but because the law demands equal application regardless of who stands before it. By now, Captain Martinez had moved forward to stand behind his officers, a visible show of institutional presence in the face of this extraordinary situation. Your Honor, the captain began cautiously. While I understand your concerns, I'm not sure the court has jurisdiction to. The court has jurisdiction over the administration of justice, Captain, Judge Wilson replied firmly. And when officers of the law demonstrate bias that compromises that justice, the court has not only jurisdiction but obligation to address it. However, if you prefer, we can discuss this matter in a more formal hearing with departmental attorneys present. I'm certain the media would find such proceedings illuminating. The implied threat hung in the air. Everyone present understood that a public examination of police practices would be far more damaging than accepting the judge's terms. Captain Martinez nodded slowly. We take these allegations very seriously, Your Honor. The department will cooperate fully with your recommendations. Judge Wilson acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head before turning back to the officers. Remember, gentlemen, the badge you wear and the oath you took are meant to protect and serve everyone, not just those who look like you or live in certain neighborhoods. Justice isn't just a word inscribed on courthouse walls. It's supposed to be a practice, a commitment renewed every day in every interaction. Officer Daniels finally found his voice. Your Honor, we never intended. Intentions matter less than impacts, Officer Daniels. Judge Wilson replied, his tone softening slightly. What matters now is what you learn from this and how it changes your approach to policing going forward. He straightened the papers before him, symbolically closing this unusual interlude. You're dismissed for now, but I expect both of you in my chambers at 4 o'clock today along with Captain Martinez and a representative from the district attorney's office to begin outlining the review process. As the officers turned to leave, visibly shaken, Judge Wilson added, and gentlemen, the holding cells could use better heating. It was quite cold last night. The subtle reminder of his personal experience in their custody wasn't lost on anyone present. Several people in the gallery exchanged glances, and one elderly court clerk dabbed at her eyes discreetly. After the officers had retreated to the back of the courtroom, Judge Wilson addressed the room at large. We will now proceed with the regular docket. I believe we have several arraignments scheduled, but the courtroom would not quickly return to normal proceedings. The story of what had just transpired spread through the courthouse like wildfire. By lunchtime, reporters had gathered outside, and Judge Wilson's clerk had fielded calls from the mayor's office, civil rights organizations, and the chief judge of the district. In the afternoon session, Judge Wilson noticed several additional faces in his courtroom. Other judges who had ostensibly found reasons to observe his proceedings, community activists who had somehow learned of the morning's events, and law students furiously taking notes. What had begun as a personal indignity was rapidly transforming into something much larger, a moment that might catalyze long overdue conversations about justice, race, and the everyday experiences of black citizens in America. As he called the next case, Judge Wilson maintained his characteristic composure. But beneath his judicial robes, his heart beat with renewed purpose. Sometimes, he reflected, justice arrived in unexpected ways, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths that had been ignored for far too long. Today's reckoning was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Marcus Wilson's experience became a catalyst for change within the department. Body camera footage of his arrest was used in training sessions. Complaint patterns were analyzed, revealing troubling disparities in enforcement. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Officers Daniels and Richards requested a meeting with the judge. In his chambers, they sat uncomfortably across from the man they had once handcuffed. "Your Honor," Officer Richards began, "we wanted to say what happened that night. It made us think about things differently." Marcus nodded but remained silent, allowing them space to continue. "I kept telling myself we were just doing our job," Daniels added. "But watching that footage in training, seeing it from the outside, I wouldn't want my father or brother treated that way." "Understanding is the beginning," Marcus replied. "The question is, what will you do with that understanding when you return to patrol tonight?" Officer Richards met his gaze. "See people first, not suspects." As they left his chambers, Marcus turned to the window, watching rain trace patterns down the glass. A single incident wouldn't change systemic problems, he knew. But awareness, when it finally came, could spread like ripples in still water. Sometimes justice worked that way, not in dramatic courtroom victories, but in quiet moments of recognition, one person at a time. The next morning, he would take the bench again. And perhaps somewhere on the streets, an officer would pause before making an assumption, remembering that anyone could be more than they appeared at first glance.